Should you upgrade to the XT5 or stick with the XT4 or XT3? I've got the answer for you. Hi everyone, what's going on? I'm Andrea and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be covering some of the most frequently asked questions I've been getting on YouTube and Instagram about the newly released Fujifilm XT5 and helping you decide whether it's worth the upgrade from the XT4 or even the older yet still highly popular XT3. It's a great episode, it's to the point, it's direct, and it's everything you need. So we're going to see a quick overview of the new features in the XT5 and how does it differ from the previous models, the XT4 and XT3. How do these cameras perform against each other, and also checking out if there is any big difference in using different lenses in terms of sharpness. A really hot topic on the web right now. I'm really excited because I have many interesting examples to show you. And lastly, I would like to give you my personal opinion on which camera might be the best fit for your needs. Let me take a moment to thank my friends at Do Photo for lending me the XT5. This is not a sponsored video by any means, but they are always very kind to give me camera stuff to test and create these videos for you. The first aspect we will compare is the design of the camera. At first glance, the XT5 and the XT4 appear similar in design, but a few changes make a significant difference. The XT5 has a brand new body that is smaller, lighter, and more compact than the XT4. To me, this camera is more of an iteration of the XT3 rather than an upgrade from the XT4 in terms of ergonomics, dimensions, and weight. The grip on the XT5 feels sturdier and is more comfortable to hold than on the XT3, and at least for me, it makes the camera feel better in my large hands. The grip on the XT4 is great, but on the XT5 it does feel a little deeper compared to the XT4. I think it's the steeper grip and the sharper edge that make the difference. The top of the camera has the same analog dials format as the XT4 and XT3 with exposure compensation, shutter speed and ISO dials. On the back of the camera, the design is unchanged with all menu buttons, a joystick and adjustment dials. I particularly liked the rework of the top plate, which makes it much easier to use the buttons and dials on the back. The XT4's usability is somewhat weaker due to its slightly concave shape, which sometimes makes it difficult to use the AF and Q buttons with gloves. Ideally, I would like to see a rounded, slightly larger button on a future XT6, maybe instead of the flat shape Q button. Both cameras have a similar 3.7mm dots electronic viewfinder, and the great news, especially for us landscape photographers, is that with the XT5, Fujifilm reintroduced the three-way tilting LCD screen that goes back to the XT3 design, which gives more flexibility in portraits and is definitely more durable. The XT4 flip-out screen is ideal for videographers and hybrid shooters, but it's not very practical to shoot vertically when using the L brackets on the tripod. This is something I've already mentioned in my previous XT4 video review. So, photography-wise, I love the reintroduction of the tilt screen. Unlike the XT3, the tilt screen on the XT5 can also be pulled out towards you to give you a better viewing experience when the screen is tilted horizontally without the viewer getting in your way. I really like this little improvement. Both cameras have the same side ports, including a remote, microphone, mini HDMI and USB-C for charging and transferring. The XT5 has a much better door design that flips out and stays open, making it easier to access than the flimsy design on the XT4, which I never liked. Unfortunately, Fujifilm is persisting in keeping the remote port on the left side of the camera, making it difficult to use a cable release with an L bracket in a vertical position on a tripod. Both cameras sports a dual SD card slot and also use the same battery, so if you want to upgrade from the XT4 to the XT5, you can use your spare MPW235 battery. However, the XT5 does not have the option to attach a battery grip, which the XT4 does. For me personally, it's not a big deal since I don't use battery grips for my photography. Something interesting I've noticed is that the SD card port on the XT5 doesn't have the plastic seal we have on the XT4 and XT3. I don't know, I'm a bit worried about the weather sealing, but don't quote me on that. Another feature I really like is the SD card can be inserted and unplugged much easier than on the XT4 and XT3, since the SD memory card edge seems to be closer to the port. Additionally, the labels are larger and cleaner, so this is a very nice touch. The following section is tailored to your requests. I'm really excited to implement all the feedback that you guys I've been asked on YouTube, I've been asked on Instagram, asking what you need, what help you find clarity and make a better decision for your gear. So I've picked up a few questions and I'm gonna do my best to give you some helpful info. Great, question number one. Okay, this is where most of the noise lies around the XT5 versus the previous models. The XT5 sports a new 40 megapixel CMOS sensor paired with a new X processor 5. This gives you faster readout times and the ability to process data much quicker than the XT4 or XT3's 26 megapixel sensor, as well as a faster autofocus we will see in a few. So I've got a bunch of images here that I took with the XT5 and XT4 on the tripod and image stabilization turned off. Same setting, same lens, the Fuji 50-140. This should give us the detail we need to compare the resolution in both of these cameras. These are all raw files straight out of the camera, no post-processing. Here on the left-hand side we have the XT5 version and on the right the same image captured with the XT4. Let's zoom in. They both look super clean at the base ISO as expected. Both images look beautiful, lovely details from corner to corner. The contrast and colors are absolutely great. Of course, the resolution bump of an extra 14 megapixel on the XT5 provides a bit more fine details and a bit more latitude on cropping, but I must say the difference is not so huge. As you can see here, the edges are smoother and a tad more precise. Anyway, I'm not sure if it makes sense to upgrade from the XT4 just to gain a small increase in resolution. The XT5 has a different ISO range than the previous two models, with a base of ISO of 125 that goes up to 12800, so we now have a bit more flexibility. Before making a comparison with the XT4, let's have a look at this shot. The same frame was captured at different ISOs with the XT5. The image looks super clean from ISO 125 to 800. There might be some grain on 800, but it's very usable. There is a more noticeable difference when we jump up to 1600. Definitely more grainy, but still very usable, so that's really good. We can see a much bigger difference when we go up to 3200. I wouldn't say it's unusable, but it's definitely starting to get closer to that point. At 6400, the noise is much more pronounced. A noticeable increase can also be seen in purple color noise, and we obviously reached the limit with the ISO value of 12800. As expected, the shot is extremely noisy. In my opinion, these last two values should only be used if absolutely necessary. Okay, let's go ahead. We'll look at some comparison shots between the XT5 and the XT4. Let's jump up a few levels and look at the ISO 1600 and higher. There isn't much difference in my opinion. In the XT5, I would say there is probably a bit more noise, but you know, it's a higher resolution camera, so even the noise will show up at a higher resolution. As far as I can tell, there isn't much of a difference between the two. They are pretty much neck and neck, except for a little more purple color noise on the XT5. I've got a couple of underexposed shots here. Now, let's take these two shots 4 stops underexposed. So I'm gonna boost the exposure by 4 stops, like that. As you can see, there isn't a lot of difference between these two. I would say the XT5 looks slightly cleaner. It's hard to tell though, but both perform very well. Okay, I hope that helps. To start with, I haven't had the opportunity to try the XH2S yet, so there isn't much I can say about it. The XH models are actually targeted at a different audience segment, so I decided to not include them in this comparison. Okay, here we have 3 shots. The basic exposure, the 1-stop overexposed, and 2-stop overexposed. So let's compare the 1-stop overexposed. And on the left is the XT5 and on the right is the XT4. I'm gonna decrease the exposure slider by 1 stop, a bit of highlights recording, and as you can see, both cameras can easily handle 1 stop overexposure. Now let's go ahead with 2 stops overexposed shots. I'm going to decrease the exposure by 2 stops, also the highlights, there you go. Zooming in, we can really see that on the XT5 we have more information on the snow and more details in other areas like these trees. There seems to be a slight variation in dynamic range between the XT5 and the XT4, approximately half a stop, I would say. This is a nice improvement, although it's not a big one. This is the subject of another huge online debate. As an example, Fujifilm does not include the 10-24 in its list of lenses that can exploit the 40 megapixel sensor on its full potential. I'm a 10-24 first version user, so I decided to try it myself and share my thoughts with you. Here is the same shot taken on the tripod with the XT5 on the left and the XT4 on the right. Now let's zoom in. And as we poke around the image, it looks pretty good, although the corners are softer as expected. I'm quite pleased with the overall result. I also have to say the 10-24 is not the sharpest lens of the Fuji lineup for sure, but I don't see any negatives to using it with the XT5. By default, with my XT4 and XT3, I use lossless compression. I never seen any difference between compressed and lossless compression. Shadows and highlights recovery and colors are exactly the same. Here I try the new compressed version to see if there were any differences. The uncompressed is on the left, the lossless in the middle, and the compressed is on the right. I'm going to zoom in. There it is. To be honest, I cannot tell any difference between these three shots. I'm at an insanely high zoom in, and except for minimal differences on the focus point, that's why they don't look 100% identical, I can't detect any degradation of the image. Anyhow, I believe lossless compression is a good compromise for keeping file sizes reasonable without compromising image quality. Even though the file is twice the size of the XT4 lossless, we must keep in mind that we are working with a 40 megapixel image. Great. Okay, except for the XT3, both the XT5 and XT4 have the in-body image stabilization. Compared to the XT4, the XT5 has a slightly higher rating of 7 stops of compensation. This difference is totally negligible to me. In other words, they both perform equally well. I took these shots with the XT5 at different shutter speeds, and I had to change the aperture to get a longer shutter speed. The one at f16 looks slightly softer because of that. This last one is taken with the image stabilization turned off and with a shutter speed of 1/60, and as you can see, the shot is completely unusable. With the XT3, I would need a faster shutter speed for the same focal length and lens. So to play safe for this specific example, I would say something about 1/400. In low light situations and when shooting at long focal length, the IBIS makes a huge difference. Having tried both systems, I can say that they both have their place. Currently, the XT system meets all my requirements in terms of image quality, portability, usability, and video specs. With a wide range of high-quality lenses, the XT5 and XT4, as well as the XT3, are outstanding cameras. I think they do everything you need and more, unless you plan on printing giant wall murals that you can view from 3 feet away. At the pixel level, of course, GFX images are unbeatable. The detail is exceptional. The main advantage actually of the medium format is mostly just in resolution for larger prints and a wide dynamic range. But the drawbacks for size, speed, price, video features, lens lineups are quite drastic. To give you an example of the differences in terms of resolution, here are few shots taken with the GFX 50R, the GFX 100, the XT4 and the XT3. On this first example, the GFX 50R is on the left, while the XT4 is on the right. I'm going to zoom in. This shows what an incredible amount of details the medium format 50 megapixel sensor can capture. I know it's not a fair comparison at all, but as you can see, the result is quite different from a high-res image capture on a APS-C sensor. The image really shows more tiny details. On this next one, we have the GFX 100 to the left and the XT3 to the right. The difference here is even more drastic, so that's the deal. It was just for fun. Going back to the original question, I would absolutely choose the XT5 over the GFX. A couple of other new important updates. The XT5 has a slight improvement in video over the XT4 with the ability to record up to 6.2K at 30 frames per second, even though the image will be slightly cropped. I can also record at 10 bits 422 internally, another upgrade over the XT4 in terms of color sampling, and the introduction of the new F-Log2, which is supposed to give more dynamic range. Except for internal HDMI recording, the video quality is the same as the XT4 and XT3. However, despite the improvements over the XT4, the video stabilization of the XT5 is still not good to me. Whenever you pan the camera, the footage looks jerky and completely unusable. One of the major differences between the XT5 and the XT4 is the autofocus system. The XT5 has a 425 face detection point system and several sophisticated tracking features for objects other than faces and eyes, such as vehicle and animals. I don't shoot wildlife, but I was curious to try the new feature to track birds. The focus tracking works pretty well. In this sequence, the XT5 latched perfectly the bird for 100% of the shots in focus. Here is another sequence, almost all of these shots are in focus, but as you can see, when the building in the background kicked in, the AF got confused, so I missed the last few shots. Overall, the AF speed when shooting still is definitely better than the XT4 and the XT3. However, video-wise, the autofocus is still not very reliable. It's 2 solid steps behind other camera manufacturers like Sony or Canon. To film this short clip, I set up the AF for face eye detection, and as you can see, the result is a mess. In this case, the AF prioritized closer objects rather than latching on to the girl's face. As I said, on video, the AF is still unreliable. Fujifilm's XT5 comes with a new AI-based high-precision auto-white balance feature that works nicely. Again, I did not notice any significant difference from previous models. I think even in tricky lighting conditions, the XT4 and XT3 nailed the white balance beautifully. Fuji developed also a new film simulation aimed at JPEG enthusiasts, the nostalgic neg, characterized by its soft tones and high saturation. Here is some example of JPEG shots taken with different film simulations, the classic chrome, classic negative, and the new nostalgic negative. I really like it. It looks absolutely great on portraits. Great, now we get to the main points. Which model should you buy? Here is a sort of framework that hopefully will help you decide what's best for you. If you mostly shoot landscape photography on a tripod and you use stabilized telephoto lenses, so the in-body image stabilization is not a deal breaker, and if shooting video is not your primary focus, go with the XT3. I guarantee you it's still an amazing camera all around with the same image quality as the XT4, with which you can easily make beautiful prints. It's weather sealed, pretty decent autofocus speed, beautiful tilt screen similar to the XT5, and the remote port is positioned properly to be used with an external cable release and doesn't interfere with the L bracket. So, in my opinion, the XT3 offers the best value for money. That's why I'm still using it. With the same photo specs as the XT3, but with the addition of the in-body image stabilization and an articulated screen, the XT4 is more suited for hybrid shooters who love shooting both stills and video. The IBIS is quite handy if you use very long focal lengths or not stabilized lenses handheld. There is a caveat. As I mentioned before, the articulated screen is a pain in the butt to use with the L bracket, and it's less practical when shooting in portrait orientation, both on the tripod and the handheld. In conclusion, if you shoot both stills and video and don't mind the articulated screen, the XT4 is an excellent camera. And then if you are a hybrid shooter and you shoot not just landscapes but also a lot of moving objects such as wildlife and sports photography, and you need a bit more room to crop your shots in post, then the XT5 is probably your best choice. Compared to the XT4, the resolution bump is not an absolute game changer, but if you crop frequently, you will appreciate the improvement. While I like the reintroduction of the 3-way tilt screen, the additional video features don't really make sense to me. Having better IBIS and AF performances when recording videos would have been much appreciated. So I would say if you are an existing Fuji user thinking of upgrading for a new sensor, I would only do if you were always wanting to crop a little more, or if you weren't satisfied with the maximum size print you could make. But if you are happy with the quality you are getting out of the X-Trans 4 sensor, this isn't really as much an impactful upgrade as you might think. Okay, cool. I hope you found this video helpful. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. If you want to improve your photography and develop your vision, check out my website where you can find all my photography workshops and one-to-one online courses, and drop me an email if you are interested in anything. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao!